Hi everyone, and welcome to the Freedom is Not Free and Terrence Shan's channels. I'm here at CPAC USA 2026, and I have a very honorable guest with me, Jekielek, who is the author of the new book, Kill to Order, and he's the main host of American Thought Leaders channel. Thank you so much for agreeing to take part in our today's show.
I też jest Polakiem.
He's also Polish.
And also a fellow Pole.
Yeah, and also a fellow Pole. So, Jan, could you tell everyone a little bit about your book and what motivated you to write such a book?
Well, so, I mean, this whole issue is something that I think it's just very difficult for people to accept, to even believe that something like this can happen. It's not like your basic run-of-the-mill organ trafficking that you have in the world, okay? It's something much more serious. And so I first discovered this about 20 years ago. I'd heard rumors that this was happening, but I wanted to believe it was just kind of wishful thinking and not true, because the human mind, large-scale forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience, the human mind does not want to believe that such a thing could work. It could be real, okay? And I didn't want to believe. But I kind of got hit over the head by evidence in 2006. And I actually happened to be in Poland at the time, okay? And I got a call that 10,000 people from Israel had signed a petition to expose basically this forced organ harvesting at Auschwitz, at the museum at Auschwitz, where during the biggest Nazi German concentration camp. And so I said, okay, sure. I mean, and I saw the evidence and I knew it was real, okay? And I can explain what that is. There's been a number of heroes that have written amazing books, amazing articles, all sorts of stuff. There was a whole China tribunal published in the year 2000 that exposed this dramatically, right? Exactly, international, based with Sir Jeffrey Nice running it to prosecute Slobodan Milosevic. It did not get the media coverage it deserved. I feel like today we seem to be wiser to what the CCP is all about. And I felt this is the time. And lo and behold, right, it makes the New York Times bestseller list. It was beyond my wildest dreams to be in the top list in the world with a book on an issue that, a few years ago, people didn't want to even touch.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that's the short, long story.
You did a lot of research on forced organ harvesting in China. What was the most shocking finding for you?
To be honest, the most shocking thing for me of all, there's a paper in the American Journal of Transplantation. The title of the paper is Execution by Organ Procurement, okay? What the researchers did was they asked a question. Is it possible that in the Chinese published peer-reviewed transplant literature, there's examples of the dead donor rule violations, okay? Which means, is it possible that in the research methods themselves, they wrote the fact that they're killing people by extracting their organs, okay? And when they did this, they looked 2,000, 3,000 papers, and they found 71 cases in the published research methods that the dead donor rule is violated, that the subjects in these experiments, were actually killed by having their organs removed. It's so normal there, that's how I read it, that basically they don't even realize it's a problem to write this into their published scientific research methods. And what's something for us, which is an atrocity, it's unimaginable, right?
Crime against humanity.
What are the biggest challenges you face in verifying those evidences?
I mean, it's incredibly difficult, right? Because the crime scene is an operating room. So, someone gets forced organ harvested, they don't really we know that the bodies get incinerated, and then it's cleaned up. And what evidence, right?
It's like a Wuhan lab. It's gone.
Right, and then also, and exactly, and someone has the organ and they don't want to admit, right, what happened. Also, the way that Falun Gong practitioners were persecuted, so just a little back up a little bit, okay? They built this industry on the persecution of a group called Falun Gong practitioners. So this was 70 to 100 million people practicing truthfulness, compassion, tolerance. Actually, a recent translation of this Zhen Shanzhen, right, is to be true, good, and endure. These people were being true, good, and enduring, right? That was their faith, basically. very grassroots, very bottom up, doesn't fit into communism very well. Huge presence in Taiwan, as you know, I'm sure, right? But also massive in China, 70 to 100 million people. There was not much of an organ industry in China yet. There had been a few people that had been killed for organs. We even have a surgeon admitting to having done that before 2000. But in 2000, it scales massively, okay? They build hundreds of hospitals, like 146 hospitals, where is the number that we use to estimate the number of transplants that are actually being done annually. And basically, they dehumanized these people. That was the first part. They made them a black class, right? So in China, there's always someone that the regime considers an enemy, right? So it was the landowners early on. Actually, Taiwanese freedom, political freedom people are also considered a black class, but of course they're not in China. Students in 99, right? And then Falun Gong in 99. So they dehumanized these people and they incarcerated maybe 1 million, maybe 2 million. And this is the part where it gets, very difficult because these people, they didn't want to kill them all. They wanted to re-educate them, transfer them, break them, right? But these people don't break easily. They say, no, I'm not going to submit myself to the Communist Party. I'm going to keep practicing Falun Gong. So this unwritten rule came into play. Now I'm answering your question, okay? All Falun Gong deaths in prison will be considered suicides. It means you can work on these people as far as you can. If they die, no big deal, right? And so in this system, there are a lot of Falun Gong practitioners just dying, right? So like when people would disappear, you just kind of guessed maybe they got shipped somewhere else, maybe they just were tortured to death because it became routine. And so that's when this forced organ harvesting comes in and someone thinks, oh, I'm going to monetize basically the killing of these people, right? And so, but this, by the way, this is the other kind of shocking thing. You're asking about shocking. How can you get a 2-week heart transplant in 2 weeks?
It's impossible. People wait for years.
People wait for years because in an ethical system, you have to have a catastrophic accident, car accident, typically, or motorcycle or something. And the ethics team decides this person's not coming back, for sure, right? Otherwise, you could transplant from someone that might come back. That would be horrible, right? And then they have to match you because our bodies reject organs, right? So they reject on different things. So you match blood type, tissue type, and the size, approximations. That's why it's rare. That's why you have to wait months or years typically, right? But here in 2 weeks, well, one, and scheduled, right? So that means there's no catastrophic accident. They're making the catastrophic accident. Someone's being killed, one, and two, how do they get the 2 weeks? Well, there's 1 million to 2 million Falun Gong that are in the prison system. Actually, in 2005, the Special Rapporteur on Torture at the UN estimated that half of all the people in their massive incarceration system were Falun Gong practitioners. We don't know how many exactly, but it's some huge number, hundreds of thousands, 1 million too, right? And now, because you blood type and tissue type all these people ahead of time, you have a database. And the moment that transaction is made, 100 grand, 200 grand for a heart or a liver, there's already a pre-matched person in that system. That person can be shipped and killed to order. That's why the book is called Killed to Order. So that in itself, like when you grasp it, because I heard organ harvesting, I knew the regime was evil, I knew it could do horrible things, but this is like having an organ bank of living people, right? You want to talk about like that? It was hard for me to accept. I had to be hit over the head with the evidence, basically. Yeah.
Picking the donors custom to each.
Well, because it increases the chances. Even then, sometimes an organ gets rejected, but it increases the chances that the organ will actually not get rejected by the body and the transplant will work.
Because I did a research on Uyghurs and Uyghur genocide.
That's right.
And some of the participants, they were telling me that in the camps, they get their... First of all, they check their blood type and everything, and then they receive different kinds of tests.
That's right.
Like time to time, and as if people are needed for something like an organ transplant operation.
So and this is the horrible thing. It's such a tragedy, okay? Because so between 2000 and 2005, they built this industry of death, okay? nobody really does anything about it for 10 or 15 years, right? And then they say, aha, we have this strategic area in the northwest of China. These people, we don't really want them there, actually. We have like forced assimilation policies. Actually, in the US, we consider it literally by law, legally, that's a very high bar. We consider it genocide, the total destruction, a whole and a part of a group of people, right? So that's happening, and they dehumanize them. They incarcerate 1 million, maybe 2. There's even reports of this blood typing, tissue typing in the people's homes in Xinjiang. The whole area functions a bit like a prison camp. So this is the cost of inaction, right? Nobody did anything, and they say, oh, we'll pick another group, let's go, right? And now I'm even seeing, and I actually talked with my good friend Bob Fu. He runs a ministry called China Aid here in America. He works helping persecuted Christians in China. I noticed anecdotally that it looks to me like there's an uptick in this dehumanizing rhetoric against Christians, right? This dehumanizing rhetoric always precedes this sort of the horror, if you will, okay? And that's not just in communism. That was in Germany as well, right? In the 30s. He's seeing that too. He's seeing that there's this uptick. They're rolling up the Zion Church. They're putting controls on the Catholic clergy. And there's this dehumanizing rhetoric. One of the key points in this book, okay, in Kill to Order, is that the Chinese Communist Party instrumentalizes everything, like bodies, right? Or like it doesn't, that concept of conscience doesn't exist in the mind of this system, if you will, and the system demands total allegiance, okay? And so why wouldn't they pick another group? And I can't say for sure that Christians are being harvested for organs, but I kind of expect that this is probably going to be the next group, because why would they be suddenly dehumanizing the Christians in this extra? I mean, it's not like Christians were popular before or something like that, right? But it's like when they pick this black class, that's when it all ramps up, right? And right now they have this machine that churns through bodies. And we're talking 60 to 90,000 transplants a year. That's our best estimate. That's huge, right? It's a big, large-scale, embedded bureaucracy that, it could switch. I was actually on a panel recently with Sir Geoffrey Nice, who ran that China tribunal, right? And we were actually asked about, there's reports of, it's kind of horrible, but of children being farmed, okay, for organs. I read this report, but what I said on the panel is, it took me 3 days, because that same revulsion I felt when I first heard about the organ harvesting, I was like, wow, I just couldn't, right? And by the way, I've written all sorts of crazy torture reports for the UN and so forth, right, on the nonprofit side, but this was so horrible. So I explain this and I say, but the incentive structures are all there. I totally think it's happening, because why wouldn't it? Like, if you have no moral boundary and you can get an organ from someone that's 50% your genetic match, that reduces that rejection rate a lot, right? So why not, right? And Sir Geoffrey Nice, basically, he talks in this very clinical, measured way. You can actually clip this if you want, right? But he basically says, yeah, when you build a machine of death, I'm a little bit embellishing here, but you build this machine that does this horrible thing, how difficult is it to imagine that you couldn't put a new target into that machine? So, well, it's not hard to imagine at all, is it? Right? I didn't realize, he was more convinced than I was that it could be real. So
the CCP did so many horrible things, especially when you look at the land reform, during the revolutionary era. So they did so many horrible things. Yeah.
They starved people to death.
Well, so
40 million people.
If I may say this, right? The thing that the Communist Party is absolutely best at, aside from killing, of course, is propaganda, right? So how many of you have heard China has raised millions up from poverty, right? You hear that. This is their mantra. Now, as with all good propaganda, effective propaganda, there's a kernel of truth to it. But what they don't say is what you just suggested, that they drove people to the level of cannibalism. They created an atrocity in their own population by taking people's food in the quest of the Great Leap Forward, in the quest of steel, this insane and just total wanton disregard for human life, to the point where people were eating their own children. This is well documented. This is not a conspiracy theory, okay? And yeah, to survive, the party lifted those people out of poverty. Yeah, okay. But what did you do? What hell did you create, right? I hate that piece of propaganda. When people say it, it really makes me 100%, right? And it just makes me so mad because it's like, what a ridiculous idea. Like, at least put the context, right? Yeah, yes, you raised them out of cannibalism that you created. Thank you. Sorry, it just gets me a little bit riled up, right? Because it's so, everyone says this. It drives me insane. Jan, at least you have to concede, right? And I'm like, yeah, I can concede, but let's talk about the context. Anyway.
Yeah, this is another kind of propaganda against the CCP. They even say that. And what do you want to say to those Chinese people who don't believe in organ harvesting and saying that it's all fake news?
Well, so the Chinese Communist Party, that's kind of that's their line, right? Well, actually, typically their line is, you're evil, actually. They don't even say it's not happening. They're saying, that's just all Falun Gong propaganda, that's all Uyghur propaganda, or that's all Terrence propaganda, because by the way, thank you for both of your work in exposing the CCP. It's like, I'm honored to be here with young, I think a lot of young people in America, sorry, I'm just gonna go off a little bit here, right? But a lot of young people in America have this fascination with communism, and like, you see Che Guevara shirts. Like, what do you say when you see a Che Guevara shirt on someone, right? And you understand who Che Guevara was, right? And
a terrorist.
A terrorist and a mass murderer. Like, I mean, like an actual fact. It's not I don't even think that's contested. I don't think anyone says, no, he didn't kill a lot of people, wantonly, right? In the name of the glorious revolution, of course, right? But so thank you for being, I'm an old guy, I can say this, right? But thank you for talking about this. Like, I'm just so worried that there's so many young people that don't understand the horrors of the system.
Everything that you just said is horrible. Is there any kind of democratic response from the United States, from the European Union, maybe from the United Kingdom or from Israel, from democratic countries?
So it's most of the last 20 years that we've really known this is real. It's been very difficult. And the reason is, well, I have a whole chapter in Kill to Order about how the Chinese Communist Party is expert at making people complicit. Okay, either their local population or partners, allies, whatever. And I think that's part of the reason. So in Israel, actually, one of the first whistleblowers was an Israeli transplant surgeon. And he had this patient that got a heart in 2 weeks, and he he said, this is impossible. And so his law in 2008 was the first one that said the state cannot provide funding for China transplants. And so there's actually 6 states in America now, only in the last few years, that have adopted laws like that. Medicare, Medicaid, insurance can't pay, okay? Now, there's even a federal law that's in committee right now in the House that does that too. That's unprecedented. For the most of the last 20 years, there's not been a response like this. There's been some resolutions by the federal government in the US. There's been a few. I believe there was a law in Spain passed soon after the Israel one, but generally no action, to be perfectly honest. Canada, there's been a few things. In the last few years, there's been massive interest. And I think maybe COVID had to do with it. I think maybe watching people get welded into their homes and the zero COVID response of the revelation of the totalitarian mind of the CCP. Like, what, you're welding people into their homes? This is your solution to health crisis, right? I think that probably helped, but it took a while just for our minds to grasp that this could be real. And it took us a while to overcome the financial relationships, because we have in the US, deep financial relationships with Communist China as part of their strategy. And there's this Mark Twain quote, which again, I forget, and I really have to memorize it. But he basically says, if you're financially incentivized to not notice something, you probably won't notice it. Something like that, right? So it makes it hard. There's just all sorts of ways in which they got us to turn the other way. Also, with keeping us focused on Middle East, for example, supporting Iran and these non-state actors. So that has shifted. Two pieces of federal legislation right now, okay? One is called the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act, but the other one's called the Falun Gong and Victims of Forced Organ Harvesting Protection Act. These both passed the House. They're in the Senate. The Senate will get to decide. If they get to the floor, I think they're passing. These are kind of no-brainer legislation, sanctioning people involved, establishing it's real in law. As I mentioned, there's 44 states that can pass this type of legislation, no transplant, no payment for China transplants. And even at the grassroots level, how many of you are familiar with the Rotary Club?
Yeah.
So Rotary Club, it's a service organization across the world. By the way, this year's Rotary International Conference is in Taiwan. So it's exciting, okay? Why do I know this? Because I'm a newly minted Rotarian. Mm-hmm. And why did I become a Rotarian? Because they have a satellite Rotary Club dedicated to ending forced organ harvesting in China. So if you're just a grassroots person that, doesn't like being an activist themselves, don't need a blowhorn, whatever, you can join your local Rotary Club and actually raise awareness about this. Maybe I know they're actually interested in this book. There's great films. They've been screening to hundreds of screens, especially in Taiwan, but everywhere around the world. So there's just every level, state, federal, municipal, Rotary, grassroots. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of shift. So I feel like there's this consciousness now that we can accept this. And I think that's also why this book is kind of against all odds blowing up, getting such good sales and so forth. Yeah.
My viewers and Terrence's viewers, many of them are Chinese speakers. Will there be a Chinese version of the book?
Well, so exactly. I had a Taiwanese publishing house reach out to me, and I passed them to Skyhorse. Thank you, Skyhorse, for being the publisher. They took a chance on this, right? But I connected them. They said, "Oh, we already have another Taiwanese publishing house." So I guess there's a discussion happening. I would love to see this soon, though. Yeah.
Do they have a pressure from China?
I have not personally. The Chinese Communist Party has had nothing to say about this book thus far. But as we're filming, it just got on the New York Times bestseller list yesterday. So I don't know. That might up the game a bit, right? I think they want to keep this as far on the down low. Because by the way, they made a horrible tactical error a few years back. There's actually a survivor of this. Now that is unbelievable. I never thought in a million years we would see a survivor of forced organ harvesting in China. Why? Because it's so easy just to, kill the person and burn the body, right? It's horrible, but that's just reality. This guy is missing part of his liver and part of his lung. He didn't even realize he had been organ harvested. He just knew he had a giant cut in his side and felt horrible inside. And he lived, ended up escaping to Thailand and being rescued by the State Department in the US, okay? When he went public, they actually issued, very rare that they issue a specific response to a specific allegation. In the past, they just attacked the messenger. Propaganda, evil, you're hurting the feelings of the Chinese people. How many times have you heard that, right? Anyway, I know you guys are laughing. It's too many times, right? Yeah, that's just for the viewers, right? If you happen to be watching and you don't know that, the Chinese Communist Party pretends it represents the Chinese people, which of course it doesn't. That's ridiculous. But it says, oh, you're hurting the feelings of the Chinese people.
Yeah, their hearts are all made of glass. Taiwanese people say, oh, we hear the sound of shattering glass.
Yeah, I know. It's so crazy that they just assume the voice of the entire population, which frankly isn't too thrilled with them, especially these days. Anyway, they said, oh, we did operate on this guy, but we did it to save his life because he had done this weird form of protest where he swallowed something that he shouldn't have. Okay, we were saving his life. Except that there's no scenario where you cut into someone's side with a 14-inch gash and remove part of their liver and part of their lung, right? There's no scenario where you're saving someone's life doing this, right? For something they swallowed. And so they admitted, one, that they operated on someone against their will, in effect, and two, that they that this was real, right? That this is it's the first time the Chinese Communist Party has said we've operated on someone against their will, and we know that they're missing part of their lung and part of their liver, so they took them. So it's actually like official. And I think whoever sent that communique got in real big trouble after that, because yeah, it's just completely uncanny. So I hope we can blow this out of the water. And the reality, I'll just mention this one more thing. For you, Terrence, it's actually a lot more. I'm a white guy in America and Canadian. You're a white guy in Taiwan, Polish, okay? But Communist China, they view all Chinese as kind of like they own them. And a lot of people don't understand this. So the pressure on you to be doing this interview actually is a lot more than on me even to be talking about it. So I'm the one who should be saying, is there pressure? And I commend you and I appreciate what you do, because you're taking a very real risk doing this. Thank you.
I just want to say that this book is so important because it really exposes the true nature of the CCP. Yeah, it's very important.
Thank you. No, and that's a core reason I wrote it too, because it's this twisted, evil forced organ harvesting for prisoners of conscience is actually the perfect lens to understand the mind of the communism of that system. Yeah. So thank you I'm glad you see it in the book. Yeah, I really appreciate that, Terrence.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Terrence. Thank you, everyone, for watching. New York Times #1 bestseller right now.
Number 8.
Number 8 bestseller right now.
Top 10. New York Times top 10 bestseller. Otherwise they're going to fact check us. He's lying. Okay. It's not number 1.
It will become number 1. I feel it. I feel like it's becoming number 1 one day. Available on Amazon, right? Amazon.com.
That's right. Amazon.com. A bunch of other Amazon.ca. And I hope in Chinese soon.